Hello and welcome to the studio roundtable on the CIO and CISO relationship. I'm Drinkwater. I'm the Director of Strategy here at Hot Topics. I'm joined today by a panel of industry experts, CIOs and CISOs, all of whom have promised me this will be an amicable and respectful debate. The reason I say that, of course, is the relationship hasn't always been that way. There have been issues over reporting lines, budgets, organisational structures, and risk appetite as well. So a lot to unpack in 30 or so minutes. Brian, I'm going to come to you first. Okay. What barriers do you think have blocked a kind of more fruitful CIO and CISO relationship in the past?
So I think, to jump straight into it, sometimes it can be the reporting line and whether or not one is subservient to the other. So CISO is always seen as being in the technical area of any particular company, but in actual fact it's information security. It's not just cybersecurity or technology security. And then you've got the CIO who's in charge of the information and making sure that the information is used to its best benefits for the company. And sometimes they can conflict as a result. One wants to secure. If I want to secure that data, I would like to take it away from absolutely everybody and have nobody access it whatsoever so that I know that it's safe. That isn't practical for any particular company, and the CIO's role is to push that and make sure that we're getting the most out of that data. Otherwise, what's the point in having it? So sometimes you can have a bit of a conflict, and if the reporting lines are incorrect or they're not on par with each other, then one can be subservient to the other.
Now, that's a lovely segue, Aidan. How does it work with yourself, and what's your views in terms of that reporting line between the CIO and CISO?
And I think I might be the only CIO here, which sets me up for some kind of kicking later. Hopefully not. So I think maybe I've been kind of luckier than most. I haven't really seen much of that antagonism, but the way it's always worked for me is the CISO's always reported to me. However, I mean, that doesn't have to be the case. You got to think about the practicalities of, well, if CISO reports to chief exec or CFO as well, reporting lines kind of grow and kind of spread out a bit. But the big thing for me is making sure that the CISO is fully on board with the rest of the IT leadership team. So the CISO's got a unique role, which is risk focused. And at the risk of getting that kicking, everything the CISO does is by definition non-value add, right? And I can get kicking on that, but we need to balance that with there's only so much funding available, and what our business customers always want is, we want more of this, we want you to deliver that, we need this, we need that. Now, I jointly own that risk with the CISO. We both go to the board. I generally take a back seat there because I'm not the expert. I don't really want to do the talking on that. But we jointly own the risk and we jointly lose sleep at night. So, well, I may be, and I am one of those CIOs where I get very optimistic and very gung-ho. Let's not talk about AI at the moment because I have to be kept away from that. But there's lots of exciting things we could do and we need to do for our customers. So we've got to make sure we balance that against the risk management, which is critical. So getting back to your question, I've not seen it be a problem, but I think you just have to act more like equals. Reporting lines, maybe not, are an issue. I've never seen it as an issue so far.
Interesting. Ravinder, what's your experiences of what's essentially blocked that relationship in the past? What's your experience of how it's been a negative or perhaps a positive?
I don't think so, even in future, that there will be things will be very rosy between CIO and CISO. So I mean, we all can take some step to make this relationship better, which is very much required. But based on my experience, which I understand, especially in these organizations where sometimes CISOs report to CIO. I'm the CISO. I do not report, but in some organizations that structures still continue. Now that changes. I can see that change, that CISO has started reporting to CEO or maybe the the business head or maybe board as well directly. But I think one thing regarding that CIO, because at the end of the day you have to work together. If there are some log4j vulnerability came, for example, this is the joint effort of CIO and CISO. They have to work together. Only way to mitigation is that one may do the governance, another team will do the implementation. Sometime I think it happens that when you're telling someone that you have to do this, then, person, it's more like, other type of issues as well. So I think, and budget, sometime security tools implementation, CIO says that this is a CISO budget. I am not responsible for that. I can only, do the implementation. But CISO think, hey, these are the tools which will be implemented by CIO team. So that should be busted in that. So I think issues like that, but only thing I can say that definitely we require more collaboration between both, CIO and CISO, which will help organization and security journey.
Collaboration then, Anuj, how do you think CIOs and CISOs get on the same page? It sounds like a combination of storytelling, communication, shared resources. Well, how would you see that?
The collaboration between CIO and CISO is really a key factor of success, because until these two verticals will not work together, it will be a challenge and may not be able to paint the rosy picture, as Ravinder said. But I just want to say that the cultural part, budget, and the collaboration. So I think the budget exercise in my previous organization is go hand in hand with IT and CISO organization, CIO and CISO organization. It will help to create a roadmap to ensure that we can secure the data and the overall crown jewel for the organization.
Brian, can I come to you? How do you think you get on the same page in terms of, is it that communication, taking away the kind of reporting lines for a second there? Is there ways in which you can kind of get on the same page, have those shared objectives?
So I think it's important for transparency between the two roles. Obviously, it's going to be a lot easier to support from a CISO the CIO, or from the CIO the CISO, if you understand the pressures that you're under. And the other thing that I've always found quite interesting is the number of sort of conferences that you have. So if you have an information security conference, it's full of information security people. If you have a CIO conference, it's full of CIO people. Why? Why don't you swap? That way you'll have a better understanding of what's happening within that particular industry and within that, that level of role, to better understand your own CIO or CISO. Otherwise, sometimes you feel like you're talking a different language.
Nilesh, what's your thoughts?
So being part of Cisco, we're quite fortunate that I get to speak to a lot of CISOs and CIOs. So we get views on both sides. And I guess there's pros and cons from both sides. To Aidan's point on the reporting line, I think you probably see less friction there, because obviously they report into the CIO. So you've got common objectives, common goals, common targets of what you want to achieve from that. But at the same side, when you look at the roles, I guess there's very different objectives in terms of what you're trying to target. So a CISO's obviously got things like the compliancy, the regulatory, all of those things to think about. How do I protect that information? And how do I make sure there's no data leakage? All of those different things. But from a CIO perspective, it's a business enabler. And often there could be friction between the two, because security is obviously trying to restrict the amount of data that's leaving the organization, as you mentioned. And obviously from a CIO perspective, we need to enable the business to move forward. And how do we do that? So I guess there's pros and cons of that reporting structure of how that works. But we are seeing more and more where the CISO is reporting directly to the CEO or the board, have a seat at the table in terms of what do we need. Because there's obviously a lot of elements in that part of that is the board's concern. So brand reputation, how do we make sure our customers trust us as an organization, that our data is not going to leak out the organization. So we are fortunate that we see it from both sides. But yeah, I think there's a lot of work there to be done around the collaboration. How can we align goals? How can we align objectives, but still reporting possibly into separate board members like that?
The shared risk piece is interesting, isn't it? Because I think there has been a perception historically that the CISO will take the hit in a way, and we know that I think the average duration of a CISO is about 18 months. So I guess that is important, isn't it? There's that collaboration and you almost go together, whether you win or fail.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think the average duration for a CIO is about 3.5 years, so we don't make it much further. No, I agree that risk is shared, absolutely. I mean, going back to reporting lines, people can get hung up on that, and my view is you can have hard lines, you can have dotted lines. In the end, the CISO is the right person to be representing security to the board. Yeah, my CISO is probably with the board more often than I am. Sometimes I go with him, sometimes I don't. But the shared risk is absolutely key. You've got to hang it on someone. And that's always, I think, one of my worries is, how would you have a CISO with a completely independent reporting line owning that risk when the CIO still has to deliver most of the actions that kind of meet that risk? It is quite complicated. I think the best thing is just to have that common purpose and understand. And I think there's one other feature that hasn't come out yet, which is everybody needs to be clear what career progression they want. And I've never quite been able to work it out with CISOs. You know, there's well, I just want to earn a fortune. I want to go and work for a bank. Fine. I just want a quiet life. Fine. I'm happy doing this. Fine. But less often have I seen, I want to be a CIO. Now, maybe it's because the job isn't that good and they see it from pretty close up. But what is that? Because then we can jointly work towards that. I think that helps as well.
Yeah. Nilesh, coming to you, are there levers that the CIO and CISO can almost pull to improve relations, to bring teams together? How do you see it?
Yeah, so there's obviously the alignment of goals and objectives and priorities, and those are, I guess, pushed down from the board anyway. So obviously there'll be common objectives there. But as the industry moves forward and new tooling and obviously the way convergence is happening between technology, actually brings those two organizations together. So if you think about things like security, incident response and detection and response, for example, that's a cross multifunctional tool, right? So organizations from the CISO and CIO need to be integrated together as part of that, and that decision needs to be made together. So these new modern tools where there's convergence between all of that actually breaks down some of those silos and get those teams actually working together, open the doors. I think I was talking to someone earlier where there will be the CISOs or the SecOps team will be in a totally separate room to the NetOps team, for example. But if those tools are converging and actually they have to work together, so it's actually pushing them forward, there's a lot of potential to be unlocked as part of all of that. So they can have that holistic view of what's going on, but at the same time, getting those tools and enabling the business, but with security in mind as part of all of that.
Yeah. Brian, out of interest, have you seen that convergence? Does that take time? Is that, so I guess that almost, there's the technology side of that, but there's the people and process. That's probably the harder bit to fix in a way, isn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, you can have you'll have your separate silos in any company with regards to what they're doing, be it in finance or HR or whatever. But so many of the things that the CIO or the CISO does cross all of those barriers that it's just inefficient to do those separately. And there are points where they just have to join together. There is, why have a separate team that's worrying about patching all of your devices, but then you've got a network team that's just going to worry about patching their network devices? There should be one team that's managing that across the board.
Ravinder, you're nodding your head there. How does that tally with you, that convergence across teams? I guess that is the way forward, but easier said than done.
Yeah, I mean, if you will see, now there is no option even with the CIO team or maybe CIO team member, or maybe no option with the CISO team member that, they have to be, cross skills, enabler now. I mean, if you will see, security is one area that even IT guy need to know and at least understand all basics that what needs to be done. In the same way, I think, the collaboration with the team is very much required. One example I can quote that, most of the time, whenever we achieve something, I'm the CISO, we actually take, our CIO team, just a, team collaboration point, but we do the party, a success party together because they are the one who is implementing this on the ground. We are more on a policy making, tell them these all are the rules which need to be applied in your MDM. But at the end of the day, they are the one who is managing, implementing, and so I think this collaboration required, and definitely there is a cross skill learning with each other, which is very important to achieve common goals.
Brian, a slightly contentious question on this whole conversation, actually. I mean, these conversations have been going on probably for about a decade, haven't they? I mean, maybe longer. Why do you think that is? And I guess, how do we actually make progress on some of this stuff?
I wish I knew the answer, because then we could stop having that conversation. I think it's probably down to pressure. At the end of the day, we can sit in a room, we can talk about it and we can agree, but then we have to go back and do our day jobs. And this isn't just about the CISO and the CIO, this is about the CISO and all of the others, the financial officer, the CEO and so on. And sometimes they feel as though they've got their own role, And in some companies, they can feel, well, I've got a CISO. So the information security side of stuff, that's their responsibility, and it isn't. It's everybody's responsibility. And this is why, again, I would go back to not necessarily reporting lines, but the fact that the CISO needs to be in a position, as does the CIO, where they can make a difference, where if they say something, and even whether it's going up the chain or down the chain, they're going to be listened to. I can't secure an organization if I'm not at the same level as the CEO, for example, and I say to the CEO, you really shouldn't be doing that. And they go, well, it's my company, so I'm going to do what I want. You'll struggle. And then, of course, that falls down. Well, if the CEO can do that, then why can't I as a senior manager, I as a middle manager, as a lower manager, and so on. So you've got to be able to have that message, and you've got to have the support of absolutely everybody. And sometimes it doesn't appear that way.
Aidan, I want to come to you on that, actually, because I think certainly historically, again, there's been a perception amongst some CIOs that they're seeing as like the department says no, essentially. And I guess we probably have moved beyond that. But I mean, to your point about giving the CISO at your organisation accessibility, supporting them, having that visibility across the organisation, I guess that's the only way you start to change the perceptions top down in terms of the CISO's role. Because I think there's a perception, isn't there, that is that kind of CISO says no, and then before you know it, you're almost out of the picture, you're irrelevant or don't have as big influence as they should.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, it's not just the CISO, it's the CIO, it's all of tech, because customers always want stuff. They don't really care how it's done. They don't really want to pay for it. They don't really care about security. So, I mean, the line is absolutely everyone needs to be invested in it. I think probably a useful way of doing it, which it's stating the completely obvious, but we've also failed to do it in IT quite a lot, which is what are our customers experiencing, right? It's that whole UX, CX thing. And if I look back on the last 15 years, as we really started to professionalize how we do cybersecurity and information security, I think there were kind of multiple phases. The first phase, we threw in just bucket loads of tools because we all realized we had these enormous risks. And so got the funding, just threw money at it. And that was a bit clunky. And we didn't really think. And we didn't really think how the experience of using those tools interacted with the experience of using the rest of the productivity suites and the applications. And so you end up, if you sit back and say, right, a completely non-technical person out there, on the factory floor or in an office somewhere, how are they experiencing this? It's quite a revelation when you think, it's not really all that great. It's like, why are they being prompted to do two-factor authentication every couple of hours? I mean, that's probably wrong configuration, but people are sensitive to this stuff. And then it comes back to, if you want people to behave the right way, you've got to make it easy for them, and ideally make it quite enjoyable. So I think that addresses a large part of it. Then there's the ongoing exposure of the CISO to ExCo and the board. Can't really forget the executive committee as well, because we need them to be not preaching this, but we need them on side. We need that shadow of the leader type effect. They need to be living this stuff. Too frequently, they're like, you technical oddballs, you deal with this, and we'll run the business. And that's obviously not how things are anymore.
Nilesh, how's that tally with your experience?
I think that's spot on. More and more customers and organizations we speak to, they are prioritizing end user experience. And we've probably seen that shift in the last 5-10 years where obviously we need to enable from a business perspective, we need to make sure it's secure, and where we've got that joint objectives, the main priority is now how do we deliver that best user experience regardless of where that user is connecting from in that hybrid world today. So if I open my laptop and log into that once, maybe I've done that two-factor authentication once, everything should just work regardless of what I'm trying to connect to, whether it's a SaaS application, whether it's something back on premise, it should just work regardless of where it is in that multi-cloud environment. So the end user experience, to Aidan's point, I think is absolutely top of mind. But also the maturity within organizations, there's a huge spectrum there. And I think that goes back to the point where you mentioned we've been having this conversation for the last decade. It's because there's a huge spectrum. There will be organizations which are very complex organizations, so it's obviously a lot harder for them to move forward in terms of that unification of SecOps and NetOps. But on the other scale of it, there are organizations this is a single organization and they want everything unified and just deliver an outcome as part of that to deliver that best user experience, regardless of where that user's from. So yeah, really top of mind that is.
Fantastic.
Let's bear in mind there's never any money for it. So that's another challenge we jointly share, which can bond people.
Anuj, if you're there, come towards the end here. I mean, in your experience, what can the CIO learn from the CISO, or what can the CISO learn from the CIO? What are your thoughts? And then Ravinder, I'll come to you second on that.
I think there are a lot of things where we can collaborate. The security by design is something which we can share as a practice from CISO to CIOs. And the business perspective is really important from all the CISOs to keep in mind while we are talking about what exactly we are trying to secure. So end user experience, ensuring the availability of the data, and protecting the right data in terms of the right classification. So these are the key factors I think we can share between both the organization, between CIO and CISOs.
I think I agree with Anuj. End user experience, which is very important, because sometimes it happens when you are actually planning some new security controls, and it may interrupt our BAU, business as usual mode, because every security control at least disrupts some way of business, and maybe user will not accept this change management easily. I think CIO calibration, CIO function calibration can really help us to actually the right way of communication to both function, to end users, to board, to management, what we're trying to achieve, and especially how this journey will help us to secure our organization more. Another, I think, very relevant example, I agree with security by design. I think one area, awareness, which, we even tried in our organization where CIO and CISO function both. We run a awareness campaign on end user security when people, at the time of COVID, when people 100% workforce has been moved to home, then ensuring, what all guidelines should people follow while they are working from home, their laptop security, managing DLP, and your end user security. I think that time I also felt that when we are working together in a more collaboration mode, I think things are definitely easy, and easy as well as a good user experience as well. So awareness is one area definitely I found, if both will work together, that can actually do wonders.
Fantastic. And dare I say it, that awareness through the pandemic on security starts in the C-suite. I think we saw a few examples of that. Brian, I come to you. You're as a CISO, what do you think you can learn from a CIO? And then Aidan, I'll come to you from the other side.
I think it's important to understand those pressures that each of you are under. You're going to have your own strategies or your own goals, and at certain points they're going to merge. Both goals are achievable. This isn't like Gandalf versus Sauron. You're on the same side. But I think what is important is that you are outwardly supportive of each other. It's no good just being in a room saying, I've got your back. You've got to be saying it to the rest of the company that I support the CISO, and the CISO saying, I support the CIO as well with what they're trying to do. You've got to show that you are a collective force so that the rest of the business are going to take you seriously.
I think you just compared me to Sauron, which actually I don't mind.
Might have.
And I think once again, I think we'll come back to where I started. Maybe I've been lucky, but I've always felt it is pretty much equals. Yes, there's a kind of hierarchy there, but you have to have that collective view. It's kind of like, partners in a marriage. You need in public to always have that view. You can disagree in private, but you need to be in lockstep all the time. What could CIOs learn from CISOs? I was pondering this on the train on the way in. And every CISO I've ever worked with has had this calmness, which I sort of think comes from the worst could happen at any moment. So maybe that just sort of gets the anxiety out of your system. And so CIOs, well, we may mask it, we're kind of politically anxious all the time because how's this going to land? How's that? And what's it going to look like? So I think we could learn something from our CISOs.
Yeah, unless you're kind of nicely positioned here in between the CIO and CISO, how do you see it there? What can they learn from each other?
So there's obviously collaboration to be had there, and obviously there's obviously a lot to be learned from what's the objectives that they're trying to deliver, and obviously there's that point where in the middle that meets, right? So where you can have those common goals, common objectives, but at the same time, I guess there's a skill set element to be mindful of as well, right? Like not everyone's going to be able to be an expert on both sides of it, right? So there will be the SecOps, there will be the NetOps, they will continue, but it's all about how we can deliver convergence between them in terms of the common goals and common objectives. And obviously when we think about what we can deliver for our organization that we work for, by having that collaborate together, there's a much bigger view of what's going on in the organization, or those different tools that you're sharing. There's a lot more efficiency that could be delivered to the organization as part of all of that.
Final question, short and sharp. Brian, where's your focus for the next year? And then we'll go to the rest of the panel. What are your priorities given obviously mass economic uncertainty, supply chain issues? Where's your focus?
So for me, it's making the most of what we've got. I mean, that's kind of a common thing every single year. It's, you buy a tool because of one particular thing, but it does 5 others, and you never really look at it in depth. So that's going to be a focus, because as you said, there's no budget. It's a real struggle at the moment with the marketplace being the way that it is, and fending off or controlling the introduction of AI, which has just appeared in the same way that the internet did, with no rules, no governance, and that scares the hell out of me.
Aidan?
Yeah, it's AI, right? We all know there's never any money and things are a bit tight, I think in most companies at the moment, and I'm in 2 camps on this. Generative AI, great. Oh my God, that can make huge differences to virtually everything we do. But then there's also the kind of medium-term and long-term impacts of, do we need as many lawyers? Do we need as many these? Huge impacts. And rightly, and this is where I'm on board with my CISO, he ran a kind of all-company session last week. I said, do you want me to come? He went, no, you're too optimistic. And I accept that. He's right, because half of me, or more than half of me, is saying, this is going to be great. But it is like the early days of the internet, or the early days of the PC revolution. There's no rules, there's nothing. And that is a big concern. And so, like every company, we're trying to work that out at the moment.
So from a priority perspective, it's really important to set up a cloud security benchmarking for an organization, how we are adopting the SaaS tool, the checklist perspective, and definitely with ChatGPT and the AI tool disruptions coming in nowadays. So it's really important we create a best practices and how we are adding new AI tools in the organization. Integration of AI with the current ecosystem is a key priority for this year.
Fantastic. And last but by no means least, Ravinder, what's your priorities for the next 12 months?
Definitely generative AI tools, and because I think every business is in a hurry to adopt that immediately, so we can enhance the client experience and our business as well. But in the same time, we have done some assessment, and these tools actually pose some bigger security and privacy risk as well. So I think managing those risks, creating policies around that is definitely one bigger priority. Another priority, looking at this, if you will see some level of recession is hitting in US, and especially you're working with global company, I think one is definitely you have to give best of your output in limited budget. I mean, it's not like that, whatever you're asking and board is approving this time, because there is already a budget cut from clients as well. So I think one thing, managing your infrastructure, maybe I would say, rather use another word, low budget, security controls. Another important area, the expectation in the same level to how security function can become a business enabler in terms of how we can actually add something in bottom line of revenue. I think that is also one area that being CISO, because you are managing in information security has been a long time. Now how we can do a value add in business growth. Security as a services, security as a practice, the clients who are already serving, if there is a need of security, why can't we become a security enabler, security consultant for them? I think this is another thing which is actually getting discussed now.
Fantastic. Well, on that positive note, I'll draw this panel to a close. Thanks all for joining me at the studio, and what an amicable and respectful conversation it was. So thanks all for joining me. Anuj and Ravinder, thanks for joining us at the studio as well. And of course, thanks to you viewers for tuning in. Until next time, goodbye and see you soon.